Welcome to Haunted Talks, the official podcast of The Haunted Walk, offering ghost tours and paranormal adventures in Kingston, Ottawa, and Toronto, Ontario, and online experiences to anyone in this mortal realm. My name is Jim Dean. I am the creative director, and we thank you so much for joining us for this episode. If you are a listener of this show, I'm willing to bet that, like me, you have a passion for spine-chilling tales. Last year, around this time, a new horror-themed bookstore opened in Toronto. Little Ghosts Bookstore and Café, with its fittingly eerie name, quickly became a favorite destination for bookworms, horror aficionados, and authors alike. We're thrilled to have the owner, Krawczyk, with us, who will share what it is like running this unique business. As an added bonus, Chris will be providing us with some fantastic suggestions for our spooky spring and summer reading lists, which you won't want to miss. But before we get to that, one of my favorite parts of the spring is that some of our tours that have been hibernating over the winter, like a zombie, return to life with a vengeance. I am thrilled to announce that one of our newest additions, the Ghosts of Queen's University, reanimates in Kingston starting on Saturday, May 6th. It was a huge hit when we launched it last fall and is full of some remarkably eerie and startling tales featuring student grave robbers, professors reaching out from the beyond, heists gone wrong, and streets shrouded in mystery. It is a great way to learn the more intriguing history of the school that you won't hear on the general campus tours. We hope you can join us at Queen's this spring. In the last episode, I mentioned that we have launched ticket sales for our spring series of paranormal investigations with our partners, Phantoms of Yore. These spaces, as always, are going very quickly. And if you're hoping to join us at the SDG Jail in Cornwall, the Mill of Kintail just outside of Ottawa, or the Lorignal Jail in Lorignal, Ontario, you will want to get your tickets very soon to avoid disappointment. These special events are always a lot of fun, and you never know what might happen. For information about our ghost tours, including the Ghosts of Queen's University, our paranormal investigations with Phantoms of Yore, and our online experiences, please visit our website, hauntedwalk.com. Also be sure to follow, rate, and review the show wherever you listen, and we hope that you will follow us on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and Twitter for our latest updates, spooky memes, and spine-tingling stories. Located at 930 Dundas Street West, Little Ghosts is, of course, our favorite bookstore in Toronto. In fact, we have already had a staff event there, and at least one of our former tour guides works in the store. It is a pleasure to welcome Chris Krawczyk, owner of Little Ghosts, to Haunted Talks. Hi, Chris.
Hi.
Really looking forward to chatting with you today. I know you folks are in the midst of celebrating your first anniversary. A huge milestone for any business, so a heartfelt congratulations on that. As you were preparing to open the doors, did you already have a sense that a horror-themed bookstore and cafe in Toronto would be such a big hit? Or, like the books that you stock, were you terrified about what was going to happen next?
Yeah, mostly scared, and also maybe thought I would haunt the bookstore by myself for a little while and kind of find an audience. I am excited and also terrified still that that's not true. There's a desperate need to read spooky books, apparently.
After your first year, I'm curious what has surprised you the most about launching the business?
What surprised me the most was how warm and supportive all of these deeply spooky people would be. It's really nice to meet so many humans who are just so inviting and supportive of each other and of their work and of the business, and it's just been so soft and lovely.
I feel that's a really interesting comment. And one we see with our tour guides as well is they all tend to be really nice, interesting people who just love terribly morbid and dark things. What does that say about our society, I wonder?
Says that more people need an outlet.
Now, I'm going to go out on a limb and guess you love horror books. But what is it in particular that has drawn you to the genre? And is there a novel or two that are kind of pillars for you, or books or stories that you keep coming back to that touches on that central nerve which has kind of captivated you and drawn your interest in this area?
Thankfully, I love spooky books. Still getting stacks of new books is my favorite time, and I'm only sad that I can't read faster. It's such an interesting thing to be able to read something so terrible and use your own imagination to kind of visualize what that thing is. I obviously love horror movies as well, but there's something about someone describing it to you like they're whispering in your ear and letting you make those visions yourself that really like drives that terror home and becomes like an experience that's unrivaled. I think it captivates me in a way that other media doesn't. It also is such like a personal and intimate experience, and I've always loved reading. And I think at certain points in my life, I thought it was important to try and read things that were more, for lack of a better term, highbrow. Because I loved reading, there was like a lot of pressure to do more academic reading. But the truth is that horror sometimes does such a better job of describing really intimate issues and like feelings of dread that other literature without genre only kind of like skims across. So I found myself kind of ditching everything else and just allowing myself to languish in what I love the most. And to answer your second question, my weird favorite, I guess, always in the book that is on my shelf and it's falling apart and I have to replace all the time is Relic, which is a old pulp novel about a museum monster. It's kind of as described. It definitely like runs at a pace. There's like an investigator and a cast of characters and an archaeologist who works at the museum. They're all trying to figure out what's going on. And it culminates in just like a splashy ending where the monster is like eating fancy guests and they have to like go into the sewers under New York and figure out what's happening. And I love that it's so unmistakably pulp genre, but also has such like a healthy cast of characters. It's an easy one for me to like go back to and revisit again as like a comfort.
Oh, that sounds like a fun story. There's something of a conflict I find, obviously, on the topic of we're talking about horror or just scary topics or art. In this case, if we're talking about books or movies or whatever they are, ghost tours, but whatever the case may be, usually when you think about kind of relaxing, maybe at the end of the day or on a Saturday afternoon with a good book, you think about something that's going to be almost humorous, exciting, terrifying, or really frightening isn't usually one of the first things that many people would think of. Why do you think we enjoy being scared for fun?
I feel like there's so much to be anxious about that's real, right? We just came out of like arguably 2 years of anxiety for everyone, regardless of what your feelings about the whole thing were. Everything was uncertain. Everything was called into question. I mean, at a certain point, people thought that if you didn't sanitize the orange you bought at the grocery store, you might die. So, like, we can all just say it was an anxious time for everyone. But to retreat and like imagine that those feelings and those anxieties and that dread that you're feeling is actually coming from something supernatural that can be dispelled. Like, isn't there a comfort in innately suggesting that it's made up and you can conquer it? And also having those physical reactions because you're reading something, because you can control it, you can put the book down or you can make your way to the end. It does exercise a part of your brain that needs to run.
I'm a huge fan of books and bookstores. And I remember a quote that I read, I don't know, in high school, which is reading is to the mind as exercise is to the body. And you kind of just brought that back to me. And I hadn't thought about that for quite some time. Does your love of horror extend to other formats as well? Other than novels, are you a big fan of horror movies, graphic novels, comics? What are your other kind of faves in the horror realm?
Oh my gosh, yeah. I mean, my love of genre knows no bounds. Yeah, definitely film. I love a good monster movie. Godzilla is my specific fave, my special interest. I also read a ton of comics. Horror comics are particularly great. I love the Technicolor illustrations that usually come with horror comics, how splashy everything is, and how gory. I definitely grew up on Spawn comics, and I would argue that it has shades of that. I mean, the whole point is that the protagonist is trying to, kill Malboja, the devil, and go back to his wife, and it definitely has like a horror novel vibe. And then, I'm a metal guy. I like heavy metal and tell me that going to a Guar concert every year they tour here isn't an exercise in horror.
Now, you carry an amazing selection of books, both online and in the store itself, which hints at the category of horror maybe being much more diverse than we often think of and can overlap with other genres. If someone has only read Stephen King or more traditional fare like Monsters to be Defeated, Evil Spirits to be Vanquished, or true crime like Tales of Murder, what other kinds of interesting themes and stories do you see being explored by current day authors?
Oh, I think there's some really great things being done in the genre that bring a lot of more lesser known folkloric elements to horror as a genre. So, because we're getting more diverse voices, we're seeing a lot of fairy tales or suggested tales from myth from other countries being like absorbed into the structure of horror and being used to present generational trauma or grief or otherness, which I think is really exciting and can bring to light all sorts of tension that hasn't been explored before. We're also seeing tons of amazing queer horror and body horror written by trans people, which gives a whole other dimension to being othered by your own body. There's so much more to be said by horror than what people imagine, and so much more to think about. It's really hard for me to think that some bookstores, even major ones that have so much square footage, would only dedicate a small section to vampires, werewolves, etc. When there's so many people working, doing amazing literary work that just isn't being shelved because it defies what one would imagine for both horror and just generalized fiction. So I really try to curate an experience that gives a good breadth of everything that's going on, but I wish I had an infinite budget and much more space.
Well, that's a perfect lead into my next question, which was how do you decide which books to carry? Because I have to imagine that's a very difficult decision at times.
The answer is as much as I can all the time. My staff definitely sometimes just get barraged with large stacks of boxes, and bless them for being able to categorize all that and put it away. It's also about accessibility. So, because a lot of the bigger publishers haven't been taking these risks or onboarding the authors that we like to stock, or, some of the stuff that we want is just maybe too weird for them to take a risk on. We're getting a lot of work from smaller publishing houses that maybe have one book in their catalog, maybe five, maybe 12. So sometimes that means I have to wait and make an order worth it for them to ship to me, or maybe I have to go around traditional distro and figure out a different way to buy things. I want everything. And then it's what can I get most easily? And we get that stuff first. And then it's what can I get if I Twitter harass a publishing house in Texas? And then we get that stuff after that. And then what can I get directly from an author, even though they don't know how to sell to a bookstore? And then we get that stuff, everything, but in its time and depending on what I can do and what I can negotiate and what my purchasing power is at any given moment.
In preparing for our interview, I've been doing some reading on the current state of the retail book industry. And there was a time, I think certainly 10 years ago, maybe even 5 years ago, when the idea of opening a bookstore would be greeted with a considerable amount of sincere skepticism. Then I came across this really interesting quote from Barnes & Noble's chief executive officer in Britain, who said, "Amazon doesn't care about books. A book for them is just a thing in a warehouse, whereas bookstores are places of discovery." Do you think we've entered a time of renaissance for the neighborhood bookstore? And if so, why do you think that change is occurring? And what advantages does Little Ghosts have against the likes of Amazon?
I think we're in the renaissance of neighborhood in general. I don't know if it was always that way or if it was going to be or if we've been influenced by the past couple years. But I think isolation mixed with algorithm makes people antsy for new experience. People don't like to be told what they're going to like. They want to choose. People don't want to go into everything blind without having a conversation with someone about it. And people like to touch stuff. And all those things mean that being in a bookstore became important to people in a way that they didn't necessarily think about, I think, 10 years ago, when you had to go to see what you were going to purchase. And the idea that you wouldn't was novelty. Now it's that buying things blind doesn't make you feel anything. And you don't always get what you like. So to go somewhere and to look and to try and to see and to talk and have an experience, you're probably actually paying the same amount. And we've definitely had people who look stuff up and it's basically the same price to buy it from me as it is to buy it online, except for that you get to be at the store, and that's its own kind of currency. And then even when you buy online, people like to get their packages, they post them, we draw ghosts on them, you get extra stickers and stuff. You feel like you went somewhere, or this came to you from somewhere that you care about, not just a warehouse. It lived on the shelf. We took the selfies on the ladder with it. We cared about it. We shipped it to you. Your spooky friends said you'd like it. And all those things are important to tactile people who care to have books, which is just a specific type of person.
A word you used earlier in our conversation was community. And watching your feeds, I know that applies certainly to your customers. But one thing I've noticed, it also seems to apply to the authors themselves. And I don't know if wholesome's the right word, but there's just something very collaborative about seeing local authors in particular, or just authors who don't have a huge following or big names, having a chance to come into the store and get some publicity and have a chance to do a reading. That feels like a very important aspect of what you folks are doing. Do you think that's a correct observation?
I mean, it's certainly important to me, and I definitely think it's been wholesome for the authors who come. We often get the feedback that I maybe too much ask how they are and make sure they're comfortable. And they're like, no, like, it's fine. I'm here because I want to be. And I'm like, oh, I just want to make sure you have a nice time. But it's so nice to meet the people who are making the things that we love, who we hear the feedback all the time. We're booksellers, so people tell us if they liked it. They engage with us in that way. But I love to share that with the people who sit alone at home for years writing this thing. They should know in person that people loved it. I think that's special. And to hear from so many authors that they've never seen their book in a store before, and to be able to take it to the next level and be like, no, not only is it here, but we're going to bring you a little crowd of people who can tell you that they liked it or tell you that it made a difference to them. Like, why wouldn't you want to foster that type of community? It's just like a natural extension of what we do.
Now, I understand is right around your anniversary here, you've also started to go into publishing as well. Could you tell us how that kind of came about and what are your plans in that area?
That became a weird natural extension of what we do, I think, as well, and grew in much the way that all of our events have. When we first were interviewed by the Toronto Star about the shop opening, it was kind of something that I had said in passing, like, oh, that would be a fun thing to do, wouldn't it? And I sort of just put it away while we built our stock, and was like, I can't really focus on this, want to make sure the shop's okay. But after about 6 months, I got this message from one of the people who was a Little Ghosts monthly subscriber, so we do like a mail out. And he was like, do you want to have a meeting with me and another editor? We've been curating an anthology, and we'd love to talk to you about it if publishing was still something you were interested in. I looked at the list of contributors, and so many of my favorite authors were on it. And I was like, well, I have to talk to them because I just want to know about this book and I would love to read it. And it wound up being a pitch that would be something that I would publish. And I told them, well, I have no idea what I'm doing. I've never done it before. You've got this contributor list. You've got this grant. You can definitely just publish it yourself. What do you need me for? And they said, well, but we like Little Ghosts. And I went, well, then I guess we're a publishing house. So I was summoned, I guess.
Very, very appropriate, I think, for the for the genre. What's the title of the book? What are the kinds of stories inside?
The anthology is coming out at the end of next month, and it's called What Draws Us Near. It's an anthology of cursed media, for lack of a better term. So there are manuscripts and VHS tapes and research and houses and things you might be drawn into that might not be so good for you. So it is very, very fun. There are 15 authors on it, and the files just got proofed at the printer, so I'm very excited. This is actually our second published book because our first came out in late March, and that was also a bit of an accident. We were in the works for What Draws Us Near, and I was getting rather nervous because I'd never printed anything before. And I wasn't sure what that process was going to be like. And I knew we had to get an ISBN, which is like a Canadian filing system thing for books. There was all sorts of things that I was worried I was going to muck up my first time. And then I had been trying to get a hold of the publisher for my husband's newest book because I wanted to put it in our subscription and our monthly mail out. and they were ghosting me, which I guess is thematically appropriate, but not great, not in the good way. And when I looked further into it, they didn't have a contract, they hadn't paid, they were supposed to do marketing material months prior. And I went, well, this book is mostly done. There's some edits I would suggest. What if I took it and we published it as like a very elaborate and very self-interested print test? And so we did. So now I know I can do it, and the anthology is going to be fine. But also the first one got to be a manuscript that I really intimately knew and rather cared a lot about, and someone who wouldn't be mad at me if I fucked it up.
Did you mention the title of the book yet? I may have missed it, but I want to
that one is called It Looks Like Death.
I've seen the cover online. It looks pretty, looks like a great read. And I love the idea of kind of cursed media too. I think that's a brilliant topic and one that always captures my imagination. So I'm really looking forward to that. It's really impressive what you're doing and the different avenues you're taking, and maybe even the courage you're showing in going down some of these lines you have little or no experience in, which I think makes a perfect question to ask you. If we have listeners out there who are contemplating, doing their own thing in business or following their own artistic pursuit, but are worried they don't know enough or are not properly prepared to do something, would you have any advice you'd offer them?
Oh, we're all stumbling around in the dark, not really sure what we're doing. At least you'd be doing it for you. I fully believe in making the mistakes that are fully yourself and not the ones that other people are pushing you into. I truly wish I could tell people that I ever knew what I was doing, but I've never even worked in a bookstore ever in my life, except for the ones I own. It's scary, but everything's scary.
Says the person who runs a horror bookstore. Well, I'm looking forward to being a little scared this spring and summer. And I understand you've put together a top 5 list of some books you might recommend our listeners check out if they're interested in some spooky tales. And we have a bit of a surprise that will go along with this list once we get to our number 1 spot. But we'll wait on that for a moment. But let's start with your first recommendation, Chris.
I'd like to recommend the book that I've been yelling at people about, I think, since the start of the year, which is Tell Me I'm Worthless. It is a haunted house book. It is a fascist, transphobic, malicious house that's out to get the protagonists, who both have very conflicting ideas of what happened to them while they were inside. It just got a worldwide release. It was released only in the UK in 2020, I believe. You can now get it wherever books are sold. It's great. It's winding. It's delicious. At a certain point, it pulls like a dual narrative thing happening from both characters' perspectives. I really loved it. I thought it challenged a lot of suspected haunted house tropes and gave you something like both more brutal and more unsettling than you expected.
Okay, so the first recommendation was Tell Me I'm Worthless. Very good. That sounds interesting. What's your next recommendation for our spooky summer?
It would be bad if I did not recommend the book that we just had a signing for called LingHun. This book is a little novella. It is about grief. The main character loses her brother and her parents by a haunted house in the hopes to bring his spirit back. It's about being stuck. It's about moving on after death. It's about claiming your own life. There's a bit of a coming of age bend. It does so much in so little time. And it's by a new author, and Ai is just very, very lovely and uses a lot of very neat cultural touchstones in her work. And it sold out in record time. And so when you can get it again, I suggest you do. And I imagine we will see it sell out a lot of times this year.
Both of these sound right up our listeners' alley, I think. What's the next one?
Monstrilio also came out very recently. It's a story of a mother whose son dies, and she grows a creature from a piece of his lung. Yeah, it is both a gross creature tale because the monster in it is a monster, and another meditation on grief. It's one not to miss. This is a much longer novel. It tries a few things narratively that I didn't expect. And I really think that even if you're not into horror or the grosser aspects of this book, it's one to watch.
Yeah, the lung. I don't know. There's some real creepy about that.
Right?
What's next?
It was hard to come up with just 5. That was actually the worst part about this. Also, from this year, I really enjoyed Abnormal Statistics, which is a short story collection by Max Booth III. Max also owns Ghoulish Books, which is a publishing house in the States, and recently opened a store called Ghoulish Books. He also runs a festival, so he's been in horror for a really long time. This is a collection of some of his best short stories and a brand new one that opens the collection. Max is notorious for making me want to throw up in my mouth. His stories are very gory and very brutal, and I love how horrible he makes me feel all the time. He does a lot of stuff with the teeth, maybe falling out of your mouth, going back in your mouth, other people's teeth in your mouth. Yeah, you're making the face that I made reading this collection.
This sounds like perhaps a more advanced level of horror for if those are people are just venturing into the genre.
Yeah, there are some I suggest to people who are just horror curious. This would not be one of them. They certainly would not return to Little Ghost Books, but if you know you're into horror and you're in the mood for something that's going to deeply disturb you, I suggest any of Max's work, but particularly this one.
The true connoisseurs will appreciate that one. Okay, and what is your final recommendation for us for this spring and summer?
My final recommendation is a Blackness Absolute. This is also a collection of short stories, much more brief, all of which are a couple of pages long. Caitlin does a great job of giving you a bunch of different sort of classical horror tropes, from like a mermaid type of story to like a traveling settler. She wields a couple different narratives very, very quickly and very deftly. This was actually the pick for our first book club this year, which is something we've started doing in the shop. People really were excited to talk about it because, yeah, it does weave so many pieces of the genre together. We did have very different views between the group of 9 of us of which story we liked the best and which person we thought should have turned back before whatever happened to them. Truly, I thought it was good. Also, when she literally says a Blackness Absolute during the collection, I screamed out loud, like, oh, she said the title.
That's a joke we have around here, too. Whenever the title said, you got to be excited. And who was the author of that?
Caitlin Marceau.
Well, and this ties into kind of our big announcement. Caitlin Marceau has agreed to join us on Haunted Talks towards the end of May, and will read one of her short stories from that collection, and then chat about it with myself and Chris afterwards, about the work and about an author working in the horror genre. And I think it's going to be a lot of fun, and will allow us to have a little Haunted Talks, Little Ghost Book Club. And we would like to encourage everyone who's listening, who wants to take part, to grab a copy of Caitlin's book, which is, of course, available at Little Ghosts in Toronto. And I assume also online via your website as well, Chris?
It's true.
And that's littleghostbooks.com.
And if you use the code Book Club on our website for any of our book club picks, you do get a little discount.
Ooh, nice. That's a good enticement right there. And certainly we'd encourage everyone to read it. It'll be interesting context to have when we have her on the show. And certainly we would be happy to ask her any questions that our listeners have. And you can send those to me at jim@hauntedwalk.com. Chris, I guess the final question for you really is, for our listeners who are interested in following you and the store as it continues to thrive and prosper, where are the best places for them to do that?
You can follow us on Instagram at Little Ghost Books. There we post all of our new releases and things that are going on in the shop, all of our events, book signings, when book club is going to be, etc. And you can follow us on Twitter for a little bit less informative content at Little Ghosts Boo. Books didn't fit because Twitter handles are shorter, but we're fine with it, actually. It's pretty cute.
Yeah, it works totally. Thank you so much for being with us here today, Chris. Everyone, please grab your copy of A Blackness Absolute or any of the books that Chris recommended. I'm definitely going to be checking out a few of those this summer. And we look forward, Chris, to having you back in the next month or so to chat a little bit more. But we'll leave it there for today. So have a great rest of your day, and we'll chat with you in about a month's time. Thanks again to Chris Krawczyk and all of our friends at Little Ghosts for joining us today. In the show notes, we have put a link where you can see Chris's full list of recommendations. On our website, hauntedwalk.com, you can also get tickets for our ghost tours, including the Ghosts of Queen's University and our upcoming paranormal investigations with Phantoms of Yore. Please be sure to follow, rate, and review the show wherever you listen. It's a big help to us, and we hope you will follow us on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and Twitter for our latest updates, spooky memes, and spine-tingling stories. As always, I'd like to thank our hard-working Haunted Talks team, including Michelle Dennis, our outstanding audio editor. Until we meet again, sweet dreams.